Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to another episode of Tabadlab Live. It is a singular honor and distinction for us today that we have with us Dr. Ishrat Hussain. Dr. Ishrat Hussain, at least in Pakistan, doesn't require much of an introduction, but he really doesn't require an introduction anywhere because he spent the last 50 years helping build systems in countries all around the world, helping build economies, helping rebuild economies, helping rescue economies. For the last decade and a half, Dr. Hussain has shifted his focus from the economy to building and saving institutions. And in Pakistan, the idea of reform has become synonymous with the name Dr. Ishrat Hussain. The reason we wanted to request Dr. Ishrat Hussain to join us today was because a very important new role has just seen a change in hands, and we have in Pakistan a new governor of the State Bank of Pakistan. So basically we have a new head of the central bank. In any country, the central bank is a vital instrument to affect an improvement in people's lives. In Pakistan, the central bank has a particularly important role given the frequent fiscal and monetary problems that the economy runs into. In 1999, Dr. Ishrat Hussain was asked by the government of Pakistan to come back home, leaving behind a long and distinguished career at the World Bank as an economist, and to come home and run the State Bank of Pakistan. And what we thought would be really interesting is to have a conversation with Dr. Hussain about that experience of getting off a plane and coming to one's home country to serve the country, and to be thrust into the spotlight, onto the hot seat, and into the kind of scrutiny that very few people experience. So in many ways, this is kind of a how-to for Dr. Raza Bakr, the very distinguished, fantastic young economist that has just been named State Bank Governor. But it's really not just a how-to for him. It's really an exploration of institutional dynamics and reform with the one and only Dr. Ishrat Hussain. So I apologize, Dr. Hussain, for that very long introduction, but I think nothing shorter would have done justice to what having you here represents for us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Musharraf. It's a pleasure. I would be delighted to share my ideas and thoughts with you on this very important subject. And let's go ahead.
Fantastic. I think the way that I was thinking about the role of the State Bank Governor as an outsider is that there's got to be probably three really important ways to look at the job. The first is just at a very personal level, being governor. And that means managing your own office, managing your own diary, managing your cabinet, the people that help you be an effective leader for a very large organization. So that's one thing that I thought we would discuss with you, is just the experience of being governor and how you manage that. Then right next to that, the next sort of concentric circle around that is running the actual State Bank of Pakistan. Mm-hmm. So how you relate to the organization as the CEO, as the governor. And that has to do with operations, it has to do with the people you have at your disposal, and the primary long-term job of the State Bank. And then finally is the next layer, which is how the State Bank relates to the outside world. And of course, we start probably with the Prime Minister's office or the Chief Executive's office. We talk about the Ministry of Finance and the various other economic bodies and organizations and the bureaucracy. So those are kind of the three concentric layers. One thing that I think we want to avoid very deliberately talking about is actual monetary policy, in a sense, because everybody has very strong views on that, and I think that the State Bank Governor, when you arrived, you had your views, and the new State Bank Governor will have his. But I think where I think he could really use help is on the experience of being governor, on the experience of managing a large organization like the State Bank of Pakistan, and on managing the State Bank's relations with its key interlocutors and stakeholders.
Thank you. I think these are very pertinent questions. But let me make a distinction between an institution which is going through a complete transformation and an institution which is operating as a mature institution. So I think the advantage Raza Bakar has today, that it is an organization which has been in existence in its present shape and form for almost 16 years. The transformation process was completed, and therefore this is a running organization. My first challenge was that we inherited a situation where the nuclear tests had taken place. The central bank had frozen the resident and non-resident accounts of $11 billion. There was a complete breakdown of trust between the central bank and the people of Pakistan. And our reserves were down to $300 million, which was less than a week's import cut. So under those circumstances, the idea was how to rehabilitate the confidence of the people in the central bank and how to build up the reserves, which is a very important barometer of the market sentiment. So my first task was how we can build the relationship between the central bank and the people. And we did the first legal intervention, because this was a martial law government, so legal interventions were quite easy to achieve. That was, we said, from now on, the central bank will have no power to take over the deposits of the residents and non-residents. So a legal right was established. And then we said, okay, those who have the foreign exchange deposits, if you want them, we would reimburse you, but give us some time. So we had a plan to reimburse the foreign currency accounts of the residents and the non-residents. And then, in order to build up the reserves, we went to the open market. And we said to the money changers, the difference between the interbank market and the open market was about 2 rupees. So we said, we will give you 2 rupees and we will purchase your currency, foreign currency. And that is how we built up in the first 2 years our reserves to a reasonable level, and the sentiment started coming in, remittances started coming in too. Then we had a lot of policy reforms, and I don't want to go into that because that will take me an hour. But our exports doubled in 5 years. Our FDI reached about $5 billion at the time when India was having only $12 billion. And the remittances started coming in billions. So by the time of 2007, we had $16 billion of reserves, and the exchange rate remained stable at 60 rupees for 6 years. Therefore, the confidence started coming in, and people believe that the central bank is really trying to look after their interests rather than grab the money from their coffers for its use, because we have so much money, we didn't need the money from anywhere, so we discontinued buying from the open market and we had built up reserves. So that was the first set of interventions. The second was that I was appalled coming from the World Bank and having seen so many central banks that our central bank didn't have a single computer. Everything was done in ledgers of such, high volume paper. And people were sitting till 12 in the midnight trying to reconcile the accounts. Reports which were given to me on the banking supervision were 18 months old.
So this is really, to me, the most fascinating aspect of your time. As you know, I've been many of us have followed your career with a lot of interest, sometimes with criticism, sometimes well-founded, probably not very often. But what I found really fascinating was that, as you described, it was a really dire economic situation. I think a lot of people would say it was more dire in '99 than it is right now. And so to that point, I think you're absolutely right. Dr. Bakir is fortunate that he's not facing that kind of a crisis. Another aspect of what you said is absolutely true as well, that there was a coherent, across-the-board improvement in the macroeconomic indicators, and one of the foundational reasons those indicators could improve was the confidence that you lent to the market. But while you were firefighting in week one, month 6, month 12, the first 2 years, you were simultaneously enacting some very substantial internal reforms. So the reason I wanted to start with the experience of you being governor is that you actually achieved 3 really remarkable things in the first 6 weeks of your role. And this is retrospective, and I'm speculating, so you tell me if I'm wrong. One, personally, you managed yourself and your family's transition from a life that was very comfortable and you were used to a very different situation. And whatever difficulties that may have come with, it didn't affect your ability to run the ship that was the state bank, to understand what problems were there and to begin to start making changes right away. And 2, you were able to manage what was it was a room of very large egos and very large personalities. General Musharraf, as most Musharrafs do, spoke a lot and was very confident in what he was saying. Shaukat Aziz, who was the finance minister then, was a very self-confident individual. Khalid Mirza would not take any other point lying down at any point in his life, I don't think. So, and those are just 2 or 3. I mean, I believe the finance secretary at that time was
Yunus Khan. Muin Afzal was
Muin Afzal, that's right. Yeah. Muin Afzal was also a towering personality. So you were not just managing Ishrat Hussain's life and his direct family's life in this big transition. You were not just managing, as CEO of State Bank of Pakistan, all the problems, the ledgers, the lack of technology. You were also managing 5 or 6 other large personalities, and you were convincing them of some things. Sometimes you might have agreed on everything, but there must have been points where you had to manage disagreements. How did you do all of that separately and then do it all at the same time?
Let me say the one good thing about that period, and particularly the first 3 years of Musharraf regime, that President Musharraf used to listen to everyone and different viewpoints, but then take a decision and make sure that that is implemented, because he had this disciplined military life. So he was quick in taking decisions, but more important that he followed them. So everybody had a chance to articulate their views. Sometimes he agreed with me, sometimes he agreed with the finance minister, sometimes he agreed with the finance secretary, but none of us thought that we were being, taken for a ride or we were overruled. So we actually worked as a team, and that is something which is missing most of the time in matters of large egos. The lesson is that everyone gets the credit if you work together collaboratively and also swallow your pride, because the end results speak for themselves. Success has too many fathers and failure is orphan. So when you are successful, the finance minister will take the credit, the president will take the credit, the governor will take the credit, the finance secretary will take the credit. But if you're not able to achieve anything because you're fighting most of the time and you are trying to make intrigues against each other, everybody will cut a sorry figure. And that, to me, is the redeeming feature of that particular period of time. I was overruled, but I never took it personally. I thought the substance of the argument of their side was very good. But I got support from the president for bringing about some very, very drastic measures. For example, we split the state bank into two parts, the central bank and the banking support organization, which is the BSC. And the salary structure and the recruitment and all terms and conditions of the central bank were comparable to that of other central banks. Because these people were 10,000, there were only 600 officers. You couldn't pay them unless you change the pay scales of everyone. By taking away this division of responsibilities, today Mr. Raza Bakar is lucky that he has young entrants to the state bank coming from LUMS, from IBA, from NUST, because we are paying the same salaries as the multinational corporations are doing. A young director gets 1 million rupees. An executive director gets 1.5 million rupees. Because we were able to save the money from the subordinate staff, and we were able to convert this into the larger pay scales and attract the best people at the top level, at the middle management, and at the lower levels. And LUMS has done a case study on this particular aspect of the human resource management and technology management. These are the two aspects which completely transform the State Bank of Pakistan from a typical bureaucratic government organization to a forward-looking, modern, highly professional organization which is fully automated right now.
But here's to me, what I find fascinating, and the reason why I think, I'm not alone, but there's many of us that consider you a guru in this respect. Guru has with it some connotations of mystery.
Yes.
And the mystery to me is that you haven't been at the State Bank for 12 years. Yet the changes that were made then have somehow endured.
Yes.
There's a lot of organizational change that people manage while they have the executive authority, but the power of the collective, some would say wisdom, some would say toxicity of interest groups overwhelms the changes made once that individual is not there anymore. How was it that the state bank governors that came after you were able to maintain that cultural shift that took place on
It's an 80-20 formula. If you have got your systems in place, you got your human resources in place, and you have got your technology in place, that will carry 80% of the workload, irrespective of who is occupying the chair of the governor. 20% is dependent on the leadership. Why this whole system endured? Because it was not a top-down, transformation or change. It was a bottom-up. We had consultation right from the clerks all the way to the executive directors. The negative ratio was 95-5 in favor of change in year 1. By year 6, when the 6th change management conference took place and outside consultants like you polled them, the ratio was 5% negative, 95%. So the old institution now owns the change, irrespective of the leader. The leaders come and go, but it was owned. We also had the whole banking sector working with us. We had the quarterly meetings of consulting with our stakeholders at the bank. We took the decision, but we consulted them. Not a single SPP circular was rescinded, modified, or changed. Before that, you had one circular in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening, so there was no credibility of the central bank. So you had to establish the credibility, so you consult the stakeholders. Third, we also had regular meetings with the business community. What are their problems? How can we solve them? There were no responses to the telephone calls made by the businessmen. I had an open door policy. The first week, I had 100 visitors. In the last week of the year 6, I had only 5 visitors. Why? Because people said that the governor has opened up his doors, and people down below started following that. So all the traffic which used to come to the governor was now distributed throughout the organization. People send emails, they get a response. They make a phone call, they get a response, which doesn't happen in most of the government departments. So you have to carry the people along, and then it will endure. And the systems and the procedures have to be changed. If you don't change the systems and the procedures, and you follow the same old procedures, that change management will not work.
You mentioned change management conference, so I'm
Yes.
assuming this was a annual event that you organized.
Annual event.
Do you know if they've continued that over the years?
No, I think they felt that they are now in a, but they do have the strategy sessions.
Yeah.
For example, every governor has 5 years strategy document which they prepare in consultation with their staff.
Would you think that, given that, because I'm not sure that there's been any major reforms since you left within the state bank.
There have been reforms of a different kind. For example, a lot of people criticize me that the nationalized commercial banks were privatized. So 80% of the banking assets are in the hands of the private sector. But the private sector is not reaching out to the small farmers, to the small and medium enterprises, to the low-cost housing. Now that is a legitimate criticism. But the fact is not privatization. During the 6-year period, and also during 3 years of Shamshad Akhtar, when you had a fiscal discipline, the SME lending had gone up to 17%. Agricultural lending had gone up to 5-6%. Mortgage lending had gone up to 4-5%. So 25% was going into these areas. But when government comes and borrows at 4% above KIBOR with zero risk, what will the banks do? Will they go to the SMEs? Will they go to agriculture?
Well, this has been a point of criticism at my end as
Yeah.
well, that we've incentivized the private banking sector to crowd out, we've used the government as an instrument of crowding out of the private sector, and especially poor
So
Pakistanis.
it's not the privatization, it is what they make money. I removed all the ceilings, interest rate ceilings on agriculture, and I said there will be no mandatory quotas. But the 500 basis points compared to the corporate sector led to a 5 times increase in agriculture credit from 50 billion rupees to 250 billion in 1 year. Even those banks like Bank Al Habib, Suneri Bank, who didn't have a network in the rural areas, they come in. So you have to incentivize. You don't have to actually create an environment in which coercion takes place.
Okay, Dr. Saab, we talked about this a little bit before. I'd like to penetrate a little further, and of course, you will not answer what you don't deem worthy of answering. So I'm comfortable that you'll make that judgment yourself. In my mind, having read in preparation for this conversation, I read through the state bank law. I think it's 1956, and of course, it's been changed and amended several times. But I tried to figure out at what point the governor is made subservient to any other authority in the country. And actually, one of the reasons why I'm fascinated by this appointment and by the persona of every state bank governor is that it is among the most powerful, legally, statutorily, the most powerful positions in the country. There is again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the state bank governor does not have a boss. And the conception that the Minister of Finance can tell the state bank governor what to do, or even recently the controversy about whether the state bank governor informed the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister about a certain change, those questions are slightly moot from a legal standpoint because the state bank governor does not have the legal liability or responsibility to be answerable to any other authority. Is that correct?
Let me preface the answer. All the central bank are not independent of the government. They are independent within the government. Okay. That, I think, a distinction is very important. Okay. The people of Pakistan have elected Imran Khan as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and he's accountable to them. Okay. So he sets, and his government sets, what are the goals of the macroeconomic policy which have to be pursued. 5% growth rate, 6% inflation rate, this is the export growth rate, all the indicators. Those are settled by the government of the day. Okay. Having done that, then as far as the monetary policy and exchange rate policy are concerned, the operational autonomy resides in the State Bank of Pakistan. Okay. And as long as we adhere to those goals and we are not deviating from those goals, the government has no business in interfering because we are doing what they have asked us to do. I think that is a very subtle point. A lot of people don't realize.
No, I think it's a very well made point.
This is operational autonomy.
Yeah.
It is not autonomy per se, irrespective of any constraints. It's a constrained autonomy.
So I guess the roots of the origins of my question have not so much to do with the power dynamic, because at one level that's not really important. I mean, it might be fun for gossip reasons, but it doesn't really matter. What really matters is when it comes down to it, we have a tradition of fiscal indiscipline which causes governments to want to print money. Now, my own view, as you might know, is I'm actually in favor of a little bit of inflationary expansion, because I think we need our PSDP to be well funded. But notwithstanding that policy debate, it should not be the domain of the finance minister to be able to dictate how much money is being printed and what the interest rate will be. Is that
has been settled with the formation of the Monetary Policy Committee, which is chaired by the governor, but totally independent.
Yeah,
independent of the board of the State Bank also, because our governance is the board of directors, right? And we are accountable to the board of accountable. The governor is accountable to that. Now, even the Monetary Policy Committee doesn't listen to the governor or listen to. Governor has one vote. Sure. So he can be overruled by the majority of the people. So the monetary policy is now very much independent, and the State Bank takes those decisions through the committee and announces it publicly. So the finance minister comes to know at the same time as you come to know about it. On the exchange rate policy, you have certain goals. For example, the goal is that you must have so much net international reserves. That is the cushion which you want to print. Now, the finance minister can only say that this is what the net international reserve level should be. 3 months import cover, 4 months import cover, that can be settled. But once you have done that, then it is up to the governor to make those decisions. Whether the market right now is ripe that I can mop up the surplus liquidity, or the market is short right now and I can inject the foreign exchange into the market. And the exchange rate will depend on your current account imbalances and your external borrowing. If both of them are a positive sum, then your exchange rate will appreciate. So you have to sterilize it. But if it is perpetually in negative, then either you have to do borrowing from outside or you have to deplete your reserves. These are the decisions which are taken by the governor, but the borrowing power externally is with the finance minister. So you have to come to the finance minister and present what your projections are going to be, and then say that this is the shortfall which we are going to meet. Then you have to
Using these instruments. Yeah.
So the use of the instruments is that with the
It's the
governor,
domain of the governor. I think that settles, in a sense, the legacy that, thankfully, that you've left for not just Dr. Bakr, but those that have preceded him, and that's great. What do you think will be his biggest challenge? Is it? Have we covered any of those challenges, or do you think there's other challenges out there?
Now, I have always refrained from talking about the central bank as its operations are concerned,
Right.
and its policies are concerned. It's unfair.
Sure.
A sitting governor should not be second guessed
By
the previous governors. And I've written about it and I've refrained. You will find my record of 12 years. Every time there is a monetary policy decision on the policy rate or the exchange rate, I have never commented, despite all my friends in the TV channels chasing me like anything. I have refrained.
No, and this is why deliberately, in fact, we engaged a lot more on monetary policy than I thought we would in this conversation, because really
That was an institutional question you asked, which is legal and institutional question, and I'm willing to do. But it should be unfair.
No, I totally agree.
And the market still listens to me when I say something, so I have to be extremely careful that I'm not placing my successors in a difficult position.
Sure.
That I am saying something and they are going to do anything. This is unfair. Yeah. And I don't have the complete knowledge at this stage. I've been out of this institution. One has to be humble.
Sure.
One doesn't have to be arrogant that I have been a governor once, so I know the solutions to all the problems even 12 years later. Let's confess that I don't have complete knowledge. He has a complete knowledge. I will trust his judgment, whatever decisions he takes.
I think on policy issues, that's perfectly. I totally accept that. I guess what I was more interested in was some of the questions around. Primarily, I have a thesis about your current role, which is that you became an institutions man and a reforms man as a product of your experience as state bank governor, because that experience gave you insights, I think, into two things. One, that the public sector is changeable, that if you engage with it in the right way, and if you have the right political backing, which you did, you're able to actually change a large, up to that point it was thought nobody can change the state bank, and then you did. So I think that gave you the confidence. And then I think what gives you the inspiration is that the rest of government you were not able to change it because it wasn't your job. It was other people's job to run other parts of the government. I guess the question I have is, now that you're in the current role that you're in, and we're not talking about that today, but given your current role, would you be surprised if Dr. Bakr came out of this role with the same feelings about the rest of the system as the ones that you had when you exited your role as state bank governor?
I think he will have a different experience. He came from a different background and comes from a different experience. What his experience is going to be, I cannot predict. But let me tell you, and you know, that I'm not only a practitioner, but I'm also an observer and an analyst. And I have written books because I have to reflect upon these things. This combination of my observation, as you said, I worked on 50 countries in the world, and Pakistan's own economic history, convinced me that economics is inadequate in order to address the complex developmental issues of any country. And we have to go beyond economics. we have to take a multidisciplinary approach. And this led me to a firm belief that it is the institutions which are supposed to deliver the public goods and services to the people. You may have very good policies, excellent policies on paper, and Pakistan has very good policies on paper, but the pipe which is connecting the policies to the citizen is leaking or is completely corroded, and therefore it is not trickling down to the people. And that's why I decided that you look at energy, you look at water, you look at your law and order. The culprit behind all of this is the dysfunctional institutions. And that's why when this opportunity came, I said, yes, I would accept this challenge. Although, as you know this, you've been working for such a long time on the developmental issues, that's not an easy task at all.
No.
Because the status quo is dear to everyone.
Yes.
People are benefiting. And
people
this
will
is
fight to the death
to death.
Yeah.
And this is a challenge. At the fag end of my life, I thought, if I can make contribution, that's fine. If I don't succeed, I'll say I'll try. People say, oh, you did the NCGR report in 2008 and nobody has implemented. I said, perseverance and persistence are very important. If you give up too easily and too quickly, you never know what the fate is going to be. So that's why the institutions have become so critical, that you may have a short-term turnaround in the policies of stabilization, but if you haven't done the structural reforms, you'll go back to the IMF. So that is what this team has to worry about, that this time they have to embed the stabilization measures with deep-rooted structural reforms and institutional reforms. If they don't do that, then we would again go back to the same situation we were a year ago.
I think if you look at Dr. Bakir's CV and his experiences, one is really struck by how exceptional, he clearly has an exceptional intellect and an exceptional track record as an economist. The real question and the fear that I have, and I think many of us have, are exactly those two things. Will he be able to navigate the institutional challenges in executing good monetary policy and in influencing good macroeconomic policy outside his domain? Because that's also his job, is to influence good fiscal, to influence good macro decisions. And the other is will he be able to navigate the political economy within which all of us have to operate? Dr. Saab, I think if I can say that he won't have many better Sherpas and guides when he visits Islamabad, which he will frequently, than yourself. And I know that you'll make yourself available to him, as you do to all reformers and all young people. May I thank you once again for such an enlightening and an open and candid conversation.
But let us end by giving him a complete space, so that he's not really trying to defend himself before the media and the social media and distract his energy and attention from the real problems. So let's be a little bit more generous and give him a space so that he can operate. And if he doesn't do well 3 years later, you all have complete freedom to criticize him. But now the criticism is totally, unfounded. You haven't given him any chance to prove himself. And that I find very unsettling.
No, I appreciate that. I hope you'll also accept that I think whenever I am critical, it's based on facts, and it's hopefully tends to be fair. But yeah, you're right. And I think my own view is exactly, in fact, the reason I've had this conversation with you, and you've been so kind to have it with us, is really as a kind of support for the new state bank governor. So using this opportunity to wish him a lot of good luck, and promising him your support and the support of all patriotic
all
and loving Pakistanis. I thank you once again, Dr. Saab. Thank you for joining us.
I really enjoyed.